Logan the Layman Critic here. Today I'm going to be reviewing 2023's Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles Mutant Mayhem, directed by Jeff Rowe. And we're going to change it up a little bit today. I'm actually going to be giving the movie review as well as discussing other previous Turtles films, all while playing Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles 3: The Manhattan Project, which is probably one of my favorite Turtles games. So let's jump right into it. So, for starters, the new Ninja Turtles movie is uh, once again kind of a relaunch. It's a retelling of the origin story with some different changes. For starters, Baxter Stockman. Oh, I probably should preface this by saying that there are spoilers in this review, so be warned. Uh, so Baxter Stockman is responsible for creating the mutagen, and uh, he's wanting to create experiments and create mutants with this mutagen, but then he's mysteriously disappears and is captured by TCRI. And fast forward years later, and the Ninja Turtles have uh, come to exist because of this mutagen that accidentally got knocked into the sewer while Stockman was being captured. And the Turtles have been living underground, and Splinter has been keeping them from being exposed to the outside world because he had a bad experience trying to show them what it's like on the surface, and they were scared off, and so he does not want them to have any interactions with humans. But one time when they're outside, they stop a robbery, and they meet a teenage girl named April O'Neil who is trying to. She's an aspiring journalist for her school newspaper, and she wants to. Or it's not. I guess it's not technically a school newspaper. It's more like a. What would you call it? Like the school news, like just like a television thing. And there's been a series of robberies of high tech equipment, and it's the person responsible is named Superfly, but nobody's ever seen him. And the people who are hired to commit the robberies disappear. So the turtles decide that they're gonna help April out so they can be gain the respect of humans and hopefully integrate with society. Um, but they discover that Superfly is a mutant, and he's not the only mutant. He has friends. So I'll stop with the plot there. I don't want to give away too much. So the first thing I would say is that animation is really cool. There's been a lot of similarities between this film and uh, the Spider-Verse films, and I think that's a fair comparison. I think I would argue that maybe Into the Spider-Verse has better animation. It's more attractive, but it's very similar in style as far as that kind of. It almost looks like stop motion. It's not stop motion, but it has a very similar look to it. It's a little jerky, like it doesn't have. It looks like it's missing frames, but that's like an aesthetic choice. The action's really cool. It's beautifully animated. I like most of the character designs. I think that I don't really like Splinter's design. I mean, I know that it's being kind of played for comedic effect. He looks like a middle-aged dad who a bit of a schlub. He's got the glasses and he's wearing a bathrobe instead of a instead of a gi. Um, and I know this might be controversial in some circles, but I don't like the uh, race bending for April. Um, I should also add that I don't really like that they made her a teenager either. It makes sense within the context of the plot, but I think that the characters should be as close to the source material as possible. Uh, this isn't the first time that April's been made a teenager, and it's not the first time that she's been her race has been changed. But I would say in both of those cases, it wasn't something that I was all that crazy about. I think the one instance where they actually made her a teenager, so for the first Nickelodeon series, it worked out okay. Um, they were able to kind of make it So I liked the initial Nickelodeon series. I think they were able to kind of successfully blend stuff from the Fred Wolf cartoon from the 80s and 90s, as well as Eastman and Laird's original comic. It was a good middle ground for the most part. It did get a little silly at times, but and I can't really speak for Rise of TMNT. I've never watched it. I didn't really. I saw the artwork for it and I was just like, no, this isn't for me. I checked out. But I digress. Uh, so yeah, for the most part, I like the character designs. Another thing I don't care for is I really hate like the last few. No, I mean not every incarnation in the last few times. They keep giving Donnie like too much stuff to wear. Like they always give him glasses. It's like this. Like I really astounds me that they're still relying on this old stereotype of like smart people wearing glasses. It just seems kind of silly to me. Um, I don't like the turtles being their designs being too busy. Like I'm fine with them having like a more unique uh, design to them, so they're not all just turtles with multicolored masks. I mean, in an ideal world, I would prefer that they all wore the uniform red like in the original comics, but I recognize that the public consciousness does not recognize the turtles as having that look. They all have the red, blue, purple, orange. So that's just something I have to accept. I am holding out hope one day that maybe they'll do some like direct to video animated adaptations of the comic book storylines, sort of in the vein of Warner Brothers Animation adapting different DC storylines into films. But that that'll we'll have to see. Um, I think the voice cast is pretty good. I I do like that they used younger voices for like actual teenagers for the turtles. It does lend it a certain amount of authenticity and earnestness. Um, the only one that I didn't really think worked was Michelangelo, and I'll grant you maybe part of that is because for so long we've had a particular type of voice that we associate with Michelangelo. Maybe a little bit higher pitched, maybe more happy go lucky. And this one, his voice is kind of has a lower timbre. It did not suit the character in my opinion. I'm trying to think if there's anybody else. The Ice Cube voices Superfly, and it took me a while to notice or figure out who it was that was voicing Superfly, and then I was like, oh yeah, because immediately what came to mind was his work in 21 Jump Street. That kind of no nonsense air about him. And Superfly is kind of a cool villain. It does get a little silly towards the end when he becomes. Well, I won't spoil. But no, I will spoil. When he becomes Super Duper Fly, that's another instance where I thought it's like, this is a little bit too silly for me. Um, but yeah, no real complaints for the most part about the voice cast. Jackie Chan is great as Splinter. I think that they did a really good job kind of making him this overbearing father who really like he wants to be a good dad. He wants to connect with his sons and he wants to protect them. The one thing I would criticize about this film is that well, let me backpedal for a second here. So the big I guess you could say the big promotion with this film was this idea. Seth Rogen was, he produced it, I think, and he wrote the script, co-wrote the script, I should say. And he said that like the previous incarnations of the Turtles never really focused too much on the teenage aspect of Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles, which, for starters, I don't agree with. Virtually every iteration of the franchise has shown that in some way. Like, you can't watch the original 1990 movie and look at them and be like, oh, those aren't teenagers at all. Of course they are. Now, maybe they're not smoking dope and, you know, TPing houses or anything like that, doing that kind of teenage stuff, but they're definitely teenagers in those movies. Their lingo, their hobbies, things like that. So that was Rogen's prerogative for emphasizing that facet of the characters. Where that kind of went wrong is that they're very much teenagers and they're not enough ninjas. So the whole thing with the Ninja Turtles is that, even though it is very much an American creation, it's also steeped in Japanese culture. You have Splinter, he's the pet rat of Hamato Yoshi, or he is Yoshi, depending on which version you're looking at. And then he has a rivalry with Oroku Saki. This does not exist in the new film. They have no connections to Japan whatsoever. They become ninjas when Splinter just decides to teach them ninjutsu through YouTube. Just like that. It's a bit of a pill to swallow. And for some reason, Splinter has an Asian accent, specifically Chinese accent, and it doesn't really make any sense. So I feel like in an era where we're always wanting to avoid whitewashing and things of that nature, it kind of struck me as peculiar that they would do that when this is literally baked into the lore. And yeah, it didn't seem to focus too much on the ninja aspect, and there's no real motivation for them to be ninjas, because the Shredder is not present in this story. The main villain is Superfly. He's not working for the Shredder. The Shredder has no presence in the overall plot. So that's another issue I think I have, because that's really the appeal of Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles isn't that they're teenagers. The appeal is that they're mutant ninja turtles. The teenage thing is more just, I don't know. I mean, other than the fact that like it kind of gives you the perspective that they are young, that they're being trained from birth up until I think it's anywhere between 13 to 15, depending on which iteration you're looking at. So, yeah, so that was probably my big bugaboo with it. I didn't necessarily, the action's pretty good, but it doesn't seem like it's there maybe enough. There's also kind of a fair amount of gross out humor with like puking and stuff like that, which seems, it struck me as very Nickelodeon, which I guess I shouldn't be terribly surprised given that they're the ones that worked on it. I also thought that there seemed to be unnecessary adult elements in it. So by that I mean that like you had some occasional cursing in the film. There might even been some innuendo now I'm thinking about it. Now I'm not prudish about those kind of things, but this is obviously something that is clearly marketed towards children, towards families. So it seems out of place to me. Now, I know most people will say, well, what about the 1990 movie? You got Raphael swearing and stuff like that. And that's true. But in that particular case, I think that movie was attempting to appeal to both the comic book fans and fans of the toys in the cartoon. So I'm willing to give the 1990 movie a pass for that reason, because the source material is largely the comic and not the cartoon. This new movie is, it's very clearly intended to appeal to children, families, that kind of thing. So, but I guess the overall question is the film worth seeing? Uh, I would say, yeah, probably. I think it's worth at least one watch. Do I think it's the best Turtles film? No, I absolutely not. I think that all the buzz on the web with Rotten Tomatoes showing that it's got a higher score than the original Turtles film. Uh, I mean, I'm sure that's probably true. I don't necessarily doubt that's accurate, but you also have to take into account that when the 1990 film came out, it I think critics were kind of sitting on it. They were very dismissive of it at the time. I don't think they had the benefit of foresight to see how good of a film it actually was. I think they went in with preconceptions like, oh, it's a movie made to sell toys. When in reality, it's a very well crafted film. Steve Barron, he had a history of working in music videos. Some of them, very iconic and um, groundbreaking. You look at Aha's "Take on Me." I think he did "Beat It." Uh, Maybe was it "Beat It"? He might have done "Billie Jean." But in any case, those are both great music videos, and he's done other things too. And the puppetry and animatronic works from Jim Henson, the way it's shot, it's very, great use of lighting and cinematography. The acting, it's all pretty competent. There's not really anything cheesy as far as the performance goes. Of course, it's a silly premise, but that doesn't mean that it's not a good movie. I mean, there's plenty of movies that are silly, but they're still incredibly well crafted. And as I mentioned in the podcast that I had done with my friend Terry the Movie Man, I would rank the original Ninja Turtles film as one of the best comic book movies ever made. So I think the low score on Rotten Tomatoes for that movie in comparison to Mutant Mayhem has more to do with the biases of the time rather than the actual quality. So, yeah, going back to my initial question, is that this film worth seeing? I think Mutant Mayhem. If your kids like turtles, if you're looking for something fun to watch um, that's a little bit different, a little bit visually kind of imaginative and has uh, a lot of fun to it, then yeah, give it a shot. I mean, I liked all the different mutants and stuff. They had Bebop and Rocksteady in it, Ray Fillet, Mondo Gecko, uh, Wing. Is it Wingnut? Wingnut, Scumbug. I think that those were all of them. There might have been one other, but I I'm not. I'm drawing a blank. But cool designs, cool animation, voice cast is pretty good. Um, some of the action's pretty entertaining. I just think that there are certain things in it that don't feel very turtle to me, turtles to me. So, uh, yeah. So that's overall my review. Um, just for the record, I because I'm obviously giving a review as I'm playing this game. This is all kind of being rattled off at the top of my head. I don't have my usual talking points. Um, so where would I rank this film uh, in the turtle pantheon? Um, well, so the original 1990 film, without question, is number one. Number two, that is a tough one. Well, I really like Secret of the Ooze. it's not without its problems. The main one being the shift in tone. Uh, it's considerably lighter than the first film. It's more family friendly. The action has been toned down. For starters, they rarely, if ever, use their weapons, and most of the stuff is sort of relying on uh, items that are surrounding them and using it as a means of fighting back. So, for example, they fight in a, I think it's like a shopping mall, and they're just using whatever happens to be around, and it's all kind of silly. Now, you could that could be done with great effect. I mean, I'm not necessarily opposed to them doing that. Um, all you have to do is look at Jackie Chan's work and see that can be done very effectively and in a creative way. But in this particular case, I don't think that it really works. And we, as the audience, that we want to see the turtles use their weapons. So I think that the special effects in Turtles 2 are still incredibly impressive. Jim Henson was still working on it at the time. I believe it was his last film. And like you have Toka and Razar, who are the new mutants introduced into the film, and they're really cool. They got a cool design. They don't really get to do very much, and I would attribute part of that because they're just incredibly bulky, so they had limitations on their movement. Shredder, unfortunately, and I love Shredder in the original movie. One of the best things of that movie. Uh, Incredible presence, very menacing. Man, he wipes the floor with them at the end when they're fighting. In this movie, he doesn't really do much. I mean, other than looking angry and barking orders. Like he's not even particularly scary. He's kind of made into a joke. There's that famous line where he discovers that the mutants are babies, and he's babies. They're babies. Um, and that, yeah, I mean, he doesn't even fight. He doesn't fight the turtles at any point. When really, we as the audience, we saw him crush it. He really, like I said, he wiped the floor in the first movie, and in this movie, we never see him do that again. And I think part of it maybe was because they were afraid of doing. I'm not really sure, to tell you the truth. I mean, maybe they were concerned that the film was already kind of running long, and it moves at a pretty brisk pace. But they have him at the end. He turns into Super Shredder, which cool design. They got Kevin Nash to play him and everything, but then what ends up happening is he's just knocking out the supports on the pier, and it falls on him and he dies. Never mind that he survived being crushed inside a garbage truck. This super mutant has a bunch of planks of wood fall down on top of him, and he doesn't survive that. So, and something I know some people kind of criticize that scene. It's like, why would he do that? Why would he just be smashing all this stuff and then having it come down on them? Like the Shredder's this calculating fighter who knows how to strategize, in battle. I mean, he can take on 4 people at once. So why is it that this particular instance he's suddenly very dense? And it occurred to me, I think the reason behind that was because we have it established early on that the professor, Professor Perry, who is kidnapped and forced to create the New Mutants, he had tampered with the mutagen to make the mutants have diminished intelligence. So I'm wondering if that's sort of the side effects that occurred when Shredder drank the ooze. That is that his mental capacity was diminished from it. So his sense of judgment was severely impaired. That's my theory, and I'm sticking to it. So I'm gonna put a pin on number two. I'm not sure where I'm gonna place that. I don't know if it's my second favorite or not. We'll move on to number three. So uh, number three is, well, it's definitely not one of my favorites. Um, the pluses is one of the pluses is that they get their weapons back. They're using them again. There's some cool fights. Uh, it's kind of neat putting them in feudal Japan. I think it lends itself well to that idea. I always remember as a kid I had a Leonardo action figure where he wore samurai armor, and I loved that toy. So it was cool to see them in the movie wearing that same kind of thing and fighting against. Well, most of them I think are just peasants. They're not really fighting honor guards, but um, yeah, I mean that's some of the action's pretty fun. Um, Again, it goes into some pretty silly stuff. The animatronics are definitely a step down, maybe even two or three steps down. Jim Henson's studio did not work on this particular film, and I'm not really sure exactly what the reasoning is behind that. My guess is maybe that uh, the studio wanted to cut corners on the costs. And yeah, as a kid, I probably I did not notice any particular difference. I mean, the only thing I really noticed was like the changes in voices. Uh, Splinters in particular was very noticeable. You know, it's obviously the same kind of characterization, but it's not Kevin Clash voicing, which he's part of the was part of the Jim Henson company, so it made sense that he wouldn't have returned. The bad guy in Ninja Turtles 3, lame, 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 lame. Not cool at all. You know, just not particularly menacing, not innocent, interesting in any way. Um, I think, as a kid, I just wanted them to bring Shredder back because Shredder's always been my favorite Turtles villain. But looking back now, having read the comics since then, I think it would have been cooler if they had done something with Savanti Romero and Renette. Um, but my guess is that, well, see, I mean, even if you use the argument that kids wouldn't have been familiar with those characters, I mean, why does it matter? Walker didn't exist in the comics either, or in the cartoon either. So I'm not sure. But in any case, I feel like more stuff in that film doesn't work than does. Oh, and even though they brought Casey Jones back, he doesn't fight. His ancestors, his ancestor, who is the same actor playing him, Elias Koteas, he's in the film, his ancestor, and he does some stuff, and he's kind of this morally gray character, and it's kind of fun seeing that. But we really wanted Casey to come back and to, in his own words, break some skulls. But instead, he's kind of on babysitter duty when those Japanese soldiers are brought back in time. There's some funny stuff there. I think the idea of having them kind of adapting to life in the modern world was had some laughs. But there's definitely a greater emphasis on comedy, even more so than in two. But so yeah, Turtles 3, no, not one of my favorites. TMNT from 2007. So this is where I think there was a return to form. For one thing, I think the tone is closer to the original movie. If you decided that you wanted to introduce somebody to the Turtles films, I think this film, preceded by the 1990 movie, would not be a bad decision. But The animation is really cool, nice and fluid. I love the turtles' designs. This is also before they all kind of got too busy. Um, I like the idea of fast forwarding and showing, how things have gone since, those intervening the years in between. Um, Seeing what they've been up to, because they're all kind of going their separate ways. Mike dresses up as a turtle character for birthday parties. Don is doing tech support. Raph is working as a vigilante, and Leonardo is doing some work in South America. He's investigating. I don't really remember exactly why. I'm not sure what connection that might have to him. It's been a while. Um, but it's kind of cool just to see them doing different things, and sort of like, if you ever wondered, like, okay, well, what would the turtles do if they were adults? This is kind of answering that question, even though they still are teenagers. The fight scenes are pretty cool. With the animation being the way it is, it gives them it's a greater medium for showing off their ability to fight. It feels a lot more like the comics as far as like their physicality. They're a little bit leaner, smaller, um, not quite. I don't want to say bulky, because the the, the live action films, they weren't bulky in the originals, but they were clearly adult men in rubber suits. So here, you don't have that. They look a little bit more like, uh, I would say that their body type is closer to something like Bruce Lee, we'll say. In that fight scene between Leo and Raph, I mean, everybody talks about that. If they've seen that movie, even if they don't like the movie, they'll say that they like that scene, that it's really intense and really really cool, and I agree. My one issue, I would say, is that I don't find, again, similar issue with 3. I don't find the villains to be all that interesting, and again, they're not from the comic, so we have no previous attachment to them. So it's hard to invest in who they are and what they're doing. Um, I find them very forgettable. What they probably should have done is used Karai and the Foot as the main villains, and then had the the ancient generals as kind of like a MacGuffin for the turtles and the Foot to fight over, like as far as like gaining their power. But and it one of the things that one of the disappointments with that film is that it was it was prepared, setting itself up for a sequel, which would have had the Shredder come back. But and as I understand it, the movie did pretty well. I didn't see it when it was in theaters, but my understanding is that, yeah, it made money. But unfortunately, Imagi, the company that produced it, they went bankrupt. They think there was a series of flops and bad financial decisions that led to their collapse. So that movie never went into production. They also were going to do a Gotcha Man movie, which would have been pretty boss. Uh, but alas. So as of right now, I would say I would rank. It's a toss up. It's either Turtles 2 or TMNT for the number 2 slot. Uh, so for the next one, I would say. Hmm, number 3 slot. Number 3 slot might actually be Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles, the the one that Michael Bay produced. So, unlike a lot of people, I do not hate this film. Um, it's not perfect. It's definitely a movie that has some issues, but uh, it's a lot of fun. I think I may have seen it. I think I saw it twice in the theater. I think I saw it once by myself, and then I think I saw it another time with my brother. But the things that I like about the movie, I think that the voices are pretty good. I like the idea of using motion capture as an alternative to the animatronics. I think that was a good way of updating the turtles, and it kind of allowed a certain amount of mobility that maybe the rubber suits did not allow for. I think maybe one of the mistakes was that they shouldn't have had regular actors playing the characters. Now maybe they have stuntmen doing the martial arts and stuff, but um, I'm not sure. I think kind of what they should have done, or maybe in the future what they should do, is kind of a marriage between the two forms. So you have the rubber suits, like the Jim Henson Company put out, and then you augment that with CG. So I would say for things like making the making the eyes and the mouth more, like improving the articulation in it to make it more expressive, I think that would be the way to go. But I'm getting ahead of myself. So yeah, I mean, I like the voice actors for the turtles. I like um well, I'm not so crazy about Megan Fox as April, but I did like that they kind of tied her to the origins of the turtles, where they were doing some sort of genetic engineering experimentation on the turtles and on Splinter. And the reshoots that they had done. So the initial plan for this movie was that the character Eric Sachs was going to be the Shredder. And when news got out about that this white guy was going to be playing the Shredder, naturally people were like, no, the Shredder is a Japanese guy. His name is Oroku Saki. You can't make him just some white guy. It's a quintessentially Japanese character. So they backpedaled. They did some reshoots, and they hired a Japanese actor who, unfortunately, I don't know his name. He was kind of, they have extra scenes with Sax and the Shredder interacting, and change the trajectory of the film in some ways. So that was a good decision, even if it's a little sloppy in its execution. I do like the actor that they chose, the Shredder. I thought it was cool. They did this great introduction scene where he's sitting down. He's I think he's kneeling, and uh, a group of warriors come and attack him, and not budging from his spot, he fends them all off. And it's a nice callback to a deleted scene from the '90s film, which I've only seen. They only have a little clip of this scene, and I hope that the full footage will be released one day, and maybe reconstituted in a extended cut of that movie. But for right now, all we have is that that little bit to whet our appetites. Um, some of the action scenes, like where they're in the mountains, I thought that was really cool. Um, Basically, I think. Oh, well, one other thing. I think the casting of Will Arnett as Vernon, uh, great, because I mean I love Will Arnett. I think he's hilarious, and uh, I think his presence in the film, it was the right amount of the right kind of comedy, because he's kind of full of himself, not to the same degree that uh, Vernon is in the cartoon, and he's not really a dandy, but it's still a lot of fun. I liked his inclusion, and honestly I preferred him over having Megan Fox as April. But uh, one of the things I didn't like was the Shredder armor. It's going back to what I said about the Turtles design in recent years being too busy. It just seems way too Transformers. Just too much going on, too many bells and whistles. Like just a simple hand-to-hand fight would have been fine. The turtles themselves, even though the action's cool, I do think that it doesn't really feel like ninjutsu. It's more just like brute force because they're all enormous. Um, Even though I like some of the designs on the turtles, I think they really need to be scaled down. Um, I think it's much better when they're small. Maybe not smaller than you know the average adult, because the early comics they have them they're not the same height as an adult human, but maybe like how they are in the 90s films. Okay, so I would say I probably rank the Michael Bay produced Turtles film in the number 3 slot. The next movie, Out of the Shadows, um, even though in some ways I think it's better, it still feels a little bit too fan servicey. So we finally got Krang brought into the series, which was something that fans wanted for a long time, at least fans of the cartoon. I think having Brad Garrett voice the character was not the best choice. Um, I think the original idea of having Fred Armisen do it would have been more fun. And they really lean heavy into the gross out humor. He's always really slimy, getting his tentacles like just like slapping Shredder with it. It's like basically like the equivalent of drooling on somebody. I wasn't about that. I also thought that having the final battle be on the Technodrome, like up in the air, it was a little bit too much of a rehash of the first movie where they're fighting on the top of the tower. The Technodrome really, I mean, the Technodrome, it's the Death Star with tank treads and a giant eyeball on the top. I wish that the movie embraced that more than just all these flying pieces coming together. And yeah, I didn't like that. I didn't like what they did with Shredder. His armor looks really, really goofy, like bad Power Rangers episode. Don't get me wrong, I love Power Rangers, but it looks cheap. Um, they recasted Shredder, which may have been fine if they had actually given some screen time. Shredder is barely in the movie. I mean, they did a worse job with him in this movie than they did in Secret of the Ooze. I think the idea of wanting the turtles wanting to fit in and having this opportunity to reverse their mutation to make themselves at least more human, not maybe not if not full human. I thought that introduced a good element of conflict, especially since Leo feels obligated to hide this information from his brothers when Don reveals it to him because he thinks that it's not in their best interests, which leads to Leo butting heads with Raph about it, and of course Mikey being the more sensitive of the bunch and really, really, really wanting it, um, causes problems. Other things, I don't like. Is it Stephen Amell? I think it's Stephen Amell. Uh, I didn't like his casting as Casey Jones. I like him. He's a decent enough actor, but I don't think like making him like a police officer seem totally antithetical to Casey, that character. Casey Jones is not. I think it was Peter Laird who described his character well, saying like, he's not a guy who watched his parents get gunned down. He's just an average citizen who watches too many action films and decides, hey, what would happen if I go out on the street and you know beat people up? And I like, it's kind of comically absurd. And I think all of us have kind of had that thought at some point, like, watch a superhero movie and be like, what if I did that? What if I put on a costume and just started beating people up that were, muggers and stuff like that? But yeah, you don't have that here. And he barely wears the mask, and I don't like the design of the mask. It looks kind of stupid. He needs to be kind of grubby looking. He looks a little bit too cleaned up. And what else is there? There was something else I didn't like, but I can't think of what it was. Well, anyway, I would probably rank Out of the Shadows closer to the bottom. I think it's a weaker entry in the overall filmography of the Turtles. Maybe better than Turtles 3, but not by much. At the very least, it kind of gives us what we want, even though it doesn't do a great job with it. And then, um, and then we have the latest one, which of course I just gave my review for. So where does that? Okay, so Turtles 1990 is number 1 without question. The number 2 ranking. You know what? I'll go ahead and say TMNT. Because I think it is a tonally better, a tonally more consistent successor than Secret of the Ooze. Secret of the Ooze, I would rank number 3. Just because it's still a lot of fun, even with its flaws. I like the characters, and the creature work on it is still really impressive. Number 3 would be the first Michael Bay produced Turtles, and 4 would be Out of the Shadows, and then 5 would be Turtles 3. Actually, wait a minute. Okay. I just realized I forgot to rank Mutant Mayhem. Okay. Mutant Mayhem. Where would I put Mutant Mayhem in there? Maybe I would put Mutant Mayhem somewhere between. The Michael Bay first Turtles movie, and the second one. So, Turtles 1990, TMNT, Secret of the Ooze, Bay Turtles 1, Mutant Mayhem, Bay Turtles 2, Turtles 3. So there's my list. Oh, but just thinking about it, we do have some honorable mentions. We have, I think, just two animated films. So the first is Turtles Forever, which was a crossover with the 2003 animated series with the Fred Wolf series, and it's a lot of fun. I think my biggest beef with it is that, and a lot of people have had this criticism as well. It does not. It's not very kind to the Fred Wolf Turtles. It treats it all as being very goofy, and I will say that that show leaned more heavily into the comedy, especially in like the fourth season. That's when it really, which was like peak Turtle Mania. A lot of comedy there. Not so much in the first season. Not so much in like season 8, 9, the later seasons. But even like in 6, I think season 6, there you can start to see the tonal shift to more action, less comedy. But my point is, they treat the Turtles in Turtles Forever. They treat from that series. They're all just a bunch of goofballs. Everything is really silly. I think it was kind of a disservice to that era of the Turtles, and I also don't think that they do justice to the original comics either, because they visit those turtles at some point, and they're all just kind of stoic and serious. And the Shredder, he's easily dispatched. They like throw a bunch of debris at trash at him, and he falls off the roof, and he's easily taken care of. I think it was kind of an insult to what came before. I think this idea in the film is just like, oh, like the 2003 turtles are the real turtles. Those are the cool ones. So it felt like there was like a bias from the creative team involved there. I think that the the Nickelodeon series, when they did a crossover with the old cartoon turtles, it was a little bit more balanced. I felt like they paid proper homage to what came before, while also acknowledging that, yeah, it's a little silly. Um, but still, Turtles Forever is a lot of fun, and I would highly recommend it. I'm not putting it on this list just because I feel like it's, well, it wasn't a theatrically released film. So, and then there's the other one. The other animated film was Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles, and I think it's Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles versus Batman, and Batman. I'm not sure. It's been a while, but I remember liking it a lot. It's loosely based off of the comic book of the same name. One of the key differences being that the turtles, there's like a multi-dimensional uh, crossover between them, and then that does not exist in the cartoon, if I recall correctly, or maybe I have it flipped, but that was one of the things that is missing. It's more just they're from different parts of, they're from different cities. The art design for Batman in the film, I vastly prefer to the comic book. Uh, in the comic book, they kind of have that Arkham Asylum design where it's all kind of his costume's all tactical looking, and I really hate that they went for that design. There was a period for a while where that's how they wanted Batman to look, and I think it looks ugly. Like, I wish they just embrace the superhero design that Batman has. So in the cartoon, he looks more like how Batman looked in the 1970s. Kind of that blue on gray. But the turtles, I don't like how they did the turtles in the cartoon. They just kind of look ugly. Like, the design just looks very flat to me. Um, the fight scene, probably this is what sticks out in my mind the most. The fight scene between Batman and Shredder is incredible. Really, really love it. Actually, I think after I do this video, maybe I'll rewatch that. But that movie's a lot of fun. It's been a while since I watched it, but maybe I need to go back and revisit that. Trying to think of what other turtle stuff I can discuss. I actually went through it faster than I was expecting. I don't know, folks. I don't know if I'm gonna finish this game. Well, let's talk a little bit about the future. for Turtles. From my understanding, I don't think that Mutant Mayhem did that well, and there's probably a couple different factors contributing to that. One is that just people aren't going to the movies much these days, although I think that film can be streamed. I saw it in the theater. Um, and also I think there's just maybe some, what's the word? Burnout from just comic book style movies based off of toys, that kind of stuff. So there might be brand fatigue at the moment. But from what I've heard, they are talking about doing a sequel. I've even heard talks about them doing a show. Um, and I don't know where you would. I don't know where you would go from there. I mean, with the movie, there's a setup for the sequel, so and I won't go into that here because I don't want to spoil it. But um, with the show, they could kind of. I'm sure they could probably do something with the idea of them wanting to be high schoolers. You take that further, although it just seems too far removed from what the Turtles idea is. Like, I think if you stray too far from the foundation, which is, you know, four brothers trained as ninjas, living in the sewers, living in the shadows, having to fight all sorts of different enemies from, ninja clans to extraterrestrials and traveling back in time and fighting mystical beings. Uh, any of that stuff. If you're bringing them into the light, that kind of defeats it. You're fundamentally changing the identity of what the turtles are. They're supposed to be dealing with the reality that they are freaks of nature and they're alone. And there's something maybe a little bit tragic about that, even though they are kind of happy-go-lucky teenagers going on adventures and enjoying life as best as they can. But we'll see. I mean, it's only been, I think, like a month. It came out late here in the Philippines, so I'm not sure. Was it July or maybe early August? I'm not sure. I was rereading the comics recently, and I would always, if you enjoy the Ninja Turtles films, especially the first one, I would highly recommend reading the original Eastman and Laird comics. They're relatively short each issue. Um, they're in black and white. The design is kind of crude, kind of rough around the edges, but there's a lot of charm to it. I love that first issue. For those of you who aren't familiar, the first issue is basically, so if you took from the original movie, if you took the flashbacks and the first scene where they rescue April and the first fight scene, the flashbacks, and then the rooftop fight at the end. That's essentially the first issue of the Turtles comic. The first Turtles movie is very close to the, or says the first Turtles movie is very close to the comics. It just kind of repositions certain things and takes a couple elements from the cartoon. I would I would love to see an animated adaptation like a straight adaptation of those early comics, maybe something in the vein of the Dark Knight Returns movie. But I I have my doubts that it will happen because I think with Viacom owning the rights to the Turtles, I don't think they're terribly interested in appealing to that particular demographic, and they never really had a history of doing anything like that with their products. So yeah, I'm not optimistic, but anything's possible. I mean, I've been hearing rumors that the Forever War comic that Archie's Ninja Turtles series never published, that might finally see the light of day. So who knows? I mean, I hope so. Well, I think I've said everything I need to say. Um, I guess we'll stop it here. Maybe I'll pick this up another time, and we'll show the rest of this gameplay. I hope it wasn't too boring. But thank you for listening and for watching, and hopefully we'll talk again soon about another movie. I'm not sure what, but I was thinking about doing something related to Dracula again. I might do that next month. I'm considering doing a video of, oh, what would I discuss? Well, okay, so this is actually a pretty good year for Dracula. So we had Renfield that came out, and then Last Voyage of the Demeter, neither of which I have seen yet. So maybe I will do a review on both of those and discuss Netflix's Castlevania, or yeah, Netflix's Castlevania, and there was that BBC Dracula from a couple years ago that I hated. Maybe I'll rant on that. Um, but yeah, we'll see. Thank you for watching, and take care, and God bless.